Hi, my name is Gwen Sandifer, Chief at Loud Minds, and today we're going to talk about succession planning. In fact, I received a note from a former colleague who asked, if we all know succession planning is so important, and if organizations know of its importance, especially now, why don't we do it very well? Or why might not we do it at all? So thank you, Jenny, for the question. To help us take off here, I just want to share a few thoughts from an article in Harvard Business Review from 2021. And the article is entitled "The High Cost of Poor Succession Planning, A Better Way to Find Your Next CEO." And I recognize most of you aren't on a board, aren't listening to this and planning the appointment of your next CEO. But I thought the case study made great points, and their different thoughts were good seeds for all of us to remember. In fact, they start with the high cost of poor succession planning, and they use Microsoft as an example. So even Microsoft, when it was trying to find its third CEO of the company, started outside the company and went through a few very public recruits, and then candidates not working out or ultimately turning them down. And then they did finally land on an internal candidate, which was likely the very best decision that they could have made. And yet, what if they had gone to the outside? What if they had wanted fresh perspective, or a leader CEO who doesn't have industry perspective to really bring in new thoughts and challenge the team, which frankly, that's just human nature. So some of this is just about the fact that we as humans love the sparkly, shiny new thing. We love the person that might come from far away or from an unrelated industry and really believe that they might have better ideas, better solutions, or be more creative. So that, I think, is part of the why here. But as they also research the problem and put it in perspective of cost, in the Standard & Poor's 1500 alone, it's close to $1 trillion a year in cost for poor CEO and poor C-suite transitions. So this is a huge deal. It affects the business performance. It affects outcomes of all sorts. It impacts customers, and it could impact long-range sustainability. So a solution that they put forth is to plan succession well before you need to. Well before you need to, what does that mean? In fact, they say as soon as you are have a leader in a position, succession planning should start. It's never too early. Might be a little daunting if you're that leader, but that is the best case. Secondly, they suggest that you purposefully identify and develop your rising stars. I think we've all heard that. I think we all try to do that. But think about how formalized and how regular that really is. Appoint the promising executives to the board or give them more access to it. Again, the board level may not apply to many of you. However, I would suppose you all have meetings that you lead or regular teams that you lead, and wonder, are there any high potentials that you could give a task to at the meeting, taking notes, facilitating something, presenting a project, and can you spread those duties among some of the higher potentials on the team? So how do you consider your own team meetings your board, if you will? Another possible solution is to look at both internal and external candidates. So best practice is to really go deep and wide and look at all potential candidates, and don't think of anyone, especially if they're internal, in terms of past successes. Instead, really try to connect whether that person could be successful in the expectations of the role, the upper level role, whatever that might be. And then fifthly, if you partner with search consultants to avoid the usual perverse incentives. So take a look at that. There are incentives for the higher the salary, the more compensation goes to the firm, or the faster that they put someone in the seat, the more the payment. And sometimes the first person to come forward isn't necessarily the best person for the role. So just be cautious of that if you really are formally doing recruitment. And yet that really wasn't the question that was posed. The real question that was posed was, why don't organizations succession plan when it is so important, especially now? And so I thought, let's take a look at that. The first solution offered by the authors in the HBR article was plan well before you need to. So why might a leader not plan well before you need to? There's probably just a lot of questions they have themselves. If a leader starts planning a succession, does this imply that they know what they're doing in their role? Early on, we all feel like we don't even know what we're doing. So how would we start preparing someone to succeed us? Does it imply that I know what's going to be needed next by the company? Does it imply some stagnant plan, meaning that my role, my title, my team, my function will continue on in the next 5 years? That it just feels stagnant, and it might feel a little presumptuous that whatever I am today, the next person will need to be as well. And how many of us, take the opportunity when even our team members move on to restructure, to rethink the department, rethink the role responsibilities. And so it's really hard to groom people to lead that next thing when we don't even know what that next thing might look like, or if it might continue to exist. Then there's the practical reality of, how do I do this? How do I teach someone? How do I take the time to explain? This is time out of my normal leadership role. And what does planning communicate? If I start talking about succession planning, might it communicate I'm not committed, not planning to be here long term, I don't like the job, I'm not getting along with my boss? There's always some question that rises up in terms of the team and even your colleagues. Finally, there could be a question, if I really do start to groom people and they get really good at this, and I can count on them to take over whenever the time is right, will I become a lame duck? And do I want to feel like a lame duck? No, not necessarily, never, usually. Solution 2, the authors posed, was purposefully identify and develop your rising stars. Well, why might you not do that as a leader? Well, how do I choose who my rising stars are? And if I do choose rising stars and it becomes visible or apparent that I'm working with them, I'm developing them more, I'm contemplating their role in a succession plan, do others on the team who might be great at what they do see or feel like suddenly I'm playing favorites? Will this upset the team dynamic in some way? And will I then lose the best on my team because I have developed them? But who else will I lose? Because those that aren't being groomed are then getting a signal as well. And will you have a risk of losing those others that you didn't develop? It's very upsetting to many leaders to try to figure out how to do what's right and best for the future. And balance that with these practical realities that we live on a daily basis. So the question I pose to leaders is, what can you control? What you can control is yourself. So I ask you to just take a little twist on this question and think about an alternative. Could you develop each team member based on their respective strengths, whatever they are, continuously and loudly? So continuously and loudly means things like, you're all in meetings all the time. Can you infuse team development or individual development into your agendas? Can you think about different ways that you can ask your team members to do something different, try something a little bit creative or in a growth trajectory for their particular role? Do you know what they even want to do next? Do you know what intrigues them, what excites them? Do you talk about this in meetings when you're together? Not all the time, but just have some planned conversations throughout your meeting structures. Let them talk about it among themselves. It'll be really interesting to have your team members know who wants to know a little bit more about this or that, and maybe they can start to train each other and learn from each other. How might I, or why might I do this? Well, developing your team is the number one role of leadership. So even though it might be uncomfortable and it might take time and you might feel like you have so many other to-dos, really this is the number one to do. And secondly, it's just the right thing to do. When you are placed in a position of leadership, it is an expectation that you're going to lead the team, and part of leadership is developing. So your team members expect that of you, as does the organization. The paradox of this is that if you focus on developing others, then you will become a magnet and attract other high potentials in the organization or even outside the organization. Word gets out. When you are a leader that believes in your team, fosters their development, and gives them that support that they need. So you might lose some of the best to promotion or exiting outside for promotion. But you will also be able to attract so many to your team who might have really great new thoughts. It engages your team and improves the success of your whole department or division. So this is a way to help you all succeed and work better together. And then lastly, it actually improves your promotability. If the organization knows you are great at what you do, and yet they can't see or feel comfortable that you've got bandwidth behind you to come up and fill that vacuum if you were to be promoted, they might tend not to promote you. So give that some thought. Let me know your perspectives on this, and let me know if you try any of this to see what works, what might not, and help us develop others. Thank you.